Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 11. In response to last week's episode, which focused on, unfortunately, the sad events around tragedy and how we cope and deal with it, there have been many letters that were received, too many to read here, many thanking us for the chizuk and the strength of offering both a unique combination of the sensitivity that has to be applied, as well as acknowledging the pain, as well as learning how to cry and build and forge ahead. Because at the end of the day, though we don't have answers to these questions, that doesn't mean we cannot move forward. That doesn't mean that we cannot find deeper strengths to empower ourselves. But I do want to add a few comments to that, because one question in particular, someone asked the question, is it possible to explain tragedies like this in the context of reincarnation, Gilgulim? In Jewish faith, there are opinions actually that don't believe in the concept, that don't accept the concept of Gilgulim. But the Psak Din, as they say, the ruling is according to Arizal, and the consensus is that there is idea of Gilgulim. Gilgulim literally means a cycle. That the concept of souls returning and living, continuing their journey in another body, and this can happen a number of times. As a matter of fact, in the Shabbos, following Chav Bei Shvat, the Shabbos after the Rebbe Tzachai Mushka passed away, Parsha Mishpatim, Tovshin Memches, it was 1988, the Rebbe spoke and cited the Zohar on the chapter Elah HaMishpatim, which means literally these are the laws, and the Torah goes on about the laws about litigation, about damages, about property, and so on. The Zohar says Elah HaMishpatim, these are the laws of the Gilguli HaNeshamis. These are the so-called rules or the guidelines that govern the way souls reincarnate. So in that chapter, Mishpatim talks about reincarnation. So the questioner is asking, is it possible to explain tragedy in that context? Literally meaning that perhaps a person's life might end untimely in a tragic fashion because they finished their job and they finished their shlichus and mission in this world, and therefore a mission that was not accomplished in a previous lifetime. So there is letters from the Rebbe about this and answers from the Rebbe which categorically reject the concept. First of all, we are not in the position to know what's a Gilgul or not to be able to go ahead and start explaining these things this way. So even though there may be a higher plan in that context, we are not in the position to be able to make such judgments. Secondly, being that we're at the end of Golus, there more Gilgulim will not take place. So to say that a person is taken away and they'll finish the job in a later Gilgul is also not acceptable. And finally, most importantly, is the sensitivity to the issue. We're not here to come to explain tragedy. These are God's mysterious ways, and it's not our job to explain it, especially being sensitive to people who've gone through and have endured such tragedy. To start saying that a tragedy happened because their end came, it doesn't have to happen necessarily in a tragic way. God has other ways to do it, and there are many questions that still remain. And you see from all the talks of the Rebbe, including the one about Mrs. Lapine, the tragic murder of Mrs. Lapine in 1992. The Rebbe spoke, he didn't even reference that. He says we have questions, what will help our questions? Questions and questions and questions. I found a letter from the Rebbe that actually addresses partially this topic. There's a letter, an English letter written to an individual, the 13th of Kislev, 5716, that would be Tovshin Tez Zayin, 13th of Kislev. There's no name, it just says New Haven, Connecticut. And he writes like this, the Rebbe: I received your letter of 28th of Cheshvan, and I hope you will excuse the delay in reply, which was due to the pressure of duties. You write that sometimes you are oppressed by the thought that perhaps in a prior life some things remained to be corrected, and you wonder how this may be corrected. So though he's not addressing exactly this topic, but as you'll see from the answer, we can apply it to our discussion as well. The Rebbe continues, while it is true, as you have heard, that most souls have had a previous life, most souls, because we know there is a concept of a neshama chadash, a new soul, like the Alter Rebbe and so on. I'm adding that. The Rebbe continues, which explains, as you write, why some children suffer, and may also explain seemingly undeserved punishment in adult life. But the fact that the soul may have had a previous life should not be a cause for anxiety. For God does not deal despotically, God forbid, Chaz v'shalom, the Rebbe adds, and does not expect one to consciously correct something of which he is not consciously aware. In other words, to begin to start speculating about Gilgulim and causing anxiety as a result is not something that we should be doing. The reason that the secret of the soul's possible previous life was revealed to us is mainly in order that we should not entertain any suspicion that God's hashgacha, that God's providence, is unjust, God forbid. So that where we cannot find a reasonable explanation for any happening, we can attribute it to a previous life. In other words, the knowledge that there may have been a previous life should only strengthen our trust in God and bring gladness to our heart. This is indicated in Tehillim 25, 9, 10, etc. God is good and upright, therefore he teaches sinners the way. All the ways of God are kindness and truth. Forgive therefore my sin, may my soul dwell in goodness. And then the Rebbe concludes with the approach of Yutas Kisuv, you'll surely take advantage of the day. The enclosed brochure will be of timely interest, and I trust you will make it available to your friends. Wishing you to have good news to inform about yourself and the health of your daughters, and to serve God with joy. With blessing, and the Rebbe signs his name. So it's just a letter among many, where the key point is to start going and trying to calculate God's plan with the concept of reincarnation is not necessarily our job to do. Reincarnation is clearly part of what we'll call the spiritual immune system, which is when a soul is sent down for a mission in this world and it doesn't finish its job, not all is lost, it can be sent out again to finish that part of the job that it does. Which leads me to another question that has been asked to the Rebbe, and is actually a question in the Zohar. What will happen during reincarnation when all the souls return? Which life will return? And the Rebbe makes it very clear, based on that Zohar, that a soul is an infinite form of divine energy and can actually give life to many different bodies. So the different nitzutzes, the different sparks of the soul, can reincarnate in different people. And then when reincarnation, when Tchias HaMesim happens, resurrection happens, then all those souls will have their particular body. Just like Adam and Eve were what we call collective souls that encompassed the entire human race, and their children began to be like branches. So think of it as the souls branch off. Every soul can branch into many parts, and different souls can return in different bodies. Or actually one soul with all its parts can divide into different bodies. The Rebbe explains actually Purim 1950, the same year, 1956, 1957 I should say, Tavshin Tez Zayin, 1956, 55, Tavshin Tez Zayin, the Rebbe explained 1956 that the question is asked about why we don't have any miracles in our time. Or more importantly, why we don't designate holidays for the miracles that happen in our time. Just like by Purim and Chanukah were designated in those days, why don't we have anything like that when we have a miracle in our time to designate a holiday? And the explanation given is based on Torah Eir, because the Neshama is then when Neshama is Klolis. So something that happened to the 600,000, the Shishim Ribu Yisrael is Rosh Tevis, yes Shishim Ribu Esius L'Teira. The Shishim Ribu, like the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 37 in Tanya, that they're collective 600,000 souls. So there, an event that happens to 600,000 is like an event that happens to millions. Then later it branches off. So events that happened earlier part of history have happened to the souls when they were still, you'll call them major branches, before they became more minor branches. But the bottom line is a soul can come back into different bodies. This is an aside, just because we did have a question or two on this topic, but I really want to go back to the issue at hand. So the bottom line is like this: you cannot explain tragedies with Gilgulim. You could, after the fact, say it's possible, obviously, for a soul to have come down more than once and perhaps it finished the job or not, but to go ahead and start rationalizing is very dangerous territory. There's also an answer that the Rebbe gave to an individual who asked about the Holocaust, whether you can explain it with reincarnation as well, and the Rebbe more or less rejected that option, because obviously for the same reason. To start going ahead and rationalizing things based on Gilgulim and reincarnation would not be exactly appropriate, especially because we don't know. And then you have to start getting into what about all the tzaddikim that died in the Holocaust? And was there justice there? Is it always due to, everyone was a Gilgal, everyone is due to a reincarnation? So it's a complicated matter. More importantly, to go back to what we discussed in the last episode, most important thing is this. We don't need answers. We don't ask, the question we don't ask is why, we ask what we can do about it. We have no alternative. We have to dig deeper and find ways to build, strengthen ourselves and our children. We cannot allow a tragedy to be compounded by causing us to also be broken to the point that we cannot function and we can't teach our children how to function. And that's the way. It's a paradox, the paradox of pain and building, but that is the way of the Jew, that is the way of Torah, that is the way of the Rabbeim, that is what they taught us to do. We should only know simchas, and we should never have to even talk about these things, but being, God forbid, tragedies have happened since the last episode as well, I thought it's appropriate to address this. I want to add one more thing. I saw an answer to Rabbi Yitzchak Groner, Olav Hashalom, the shliach of the Rebbe to Australia. There was a period where there was a discussion there, or there was events there of tragic accidents all happening in a certain period of time. And then the question was, it seems to be like a, God forbid, I don't want to even say the word, like an epidemic, a magefa. And the Rebbe's response was unequivocal. He said, if you fulfill the tzivui, the command of the Rabbeim, Tragut v'Zaingut, that will be the solution to all these issues. So the Rebbe did not want to give in any way to suggest the negativity, but the bottom line is we have the power with our own goodness to rechannel the future. And no matter what happens, to start saying that we have to be on the defensive and be driven by fear, when is the next Chas v'Shalom korban going to fall, is not a Jewish attitude. And we understand the temptation to do so. The bottom line is, Traktut v'Zaingut, as the Rebbe explains, is not just a euphemism, it's not just a statement, a bumper sticker. It actually is a reality. There's an expression that's sometimes said in English, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. When you think good, you actually rechannel your attitude, it rechannels the vibes, and it actually can change destiny. That's how we believe. It's not just a matter of giving somebody some type of solace by saying, think good. It really means that you can change destiny. So our attitude, those of us that have both suffered directly or indirectly, or witnessing any tragedy, we have to gather together, and as I discussed in the last episode, and turn all that grief, all that passion, all that anger, all that negative energy into a positive revolution that's more powerful than the grief. That's what it ends up coming down to. It has to be more powerful than the grief. That whatever we've done in goodness has to be doubled and tripled to overpower the negative energies around us. This is what we have to do. I know it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like, one second, aren't we human beings? Shouldn't we be able to just succumb or comfort ourselves? Absolutely comfort ourselves. Absolutely be sensitive. But let's not forget that we have more power than we think we have. And these are words from the Rebbe, the words from the Rabbeim. The Alter Rebbe in Perek Chavav and Tanya as well says that when you forge ahead, you reveal deeper levels of goodness. This is not an explanation, and we're not trying to justify. It's the way we approach things, action-oriented. Just like when the Jews stood at the Yam Suf, between a rock and a hard place, the first time in history, with Egyptians pursuing them from behind, the water and the sea in front of them. What should we do? They broke into 4 different camps, as the Yerushalmi explains, and the Rebbe brings this in Sichos. 4 different camps. One said, let's go back to Mitzrayim. Others said, let's commit suicide, let's jump into the water. The third said, let's pray. And the fourth said, let's go to war. It seems like there's no other option. Oh, they're all wrong. And when Moses turns to God and says, what should we do? Vayuso, one word. You forge ahead. Travel forward. I told you, we're going, I took you out of Egypt in order to go toward Sinai and then go toward the promised land. That's what you should do. Why are you getting distracted and philosophizing different approaches? Forge ahead. And Nachshon ben Abdul forged ahead, the sea parted. This has happened many times in Jewish history. Those that forged ahead not only survived, but we learned to thrive. As they were oppressed, in direct proportion to that, they thrived and they flourished. Again, this is not an answer. This doesn't minimize the pain. It's about an approach on how we should do things. As I said last time, and I want to say it even more adamantly, we have to declare war against every force of divisiveness, of every force of dissent, of negativity that we show toward each other. And we have to create a revolution of goodness and achdus and unity. And once and for all, stop the bickering and stop saying, listen, I'm fighting the holy war, and the problem is with someone else, which is always what people do. They point their fingers. You're the problem. If you stop what you're doing, we wouldn't have this anymore. I've heard that as well. You have to look inside yourself, and maybe something should shake us all up. I want to share a story. There was a chassid whose son was sent a hazmana. Hazmana is a summons to come to a bezdin. He had someone who claimed that he owed him a certain amount of money, $30,000, for work he did. This fellow said he never did any work for me. Maybe he called me once. No basis, the whole thing. So he was ready to go to the din Torah to fight, to challenge this demand, this ridiculous demand. And he was an honest man, and he was going to go to din Torah. Someone's calling to din Torah. He's not going to not go. He's going to go. The night before the din Torah, the night before they were supposed to judge on this matter, he gets a call from his father, Chassidus Applied. His father says to him, I'm not telling you what to do, but I'd like to tell you that in our family there's a Meseda. Meseda means there's a type of custom that we don't go to din Torahs. We've never gone to a din Torah. We've never been facing another Jew in any battle, no matter what. He hung up the phone. The son, the next morning, the first thing he called up the bezdin. He says, I'm not coming to the din Torah. I'm paying up the $30,000. I don't want to go to the din Torah. This is a lesson that we have to learn from. This is a Chassidus Applied. Money is not the most important thing in life. You know, people over $500 will not talk to another person the rest of their lives. Pettiness, smallness. This is a world, a material world. To be seduced by the material world and forget what counts is insanity. So I'm not suggesting in any way that what's happening now, any tragedies, are because of this, because no one points fingers. But it's a wake-up call after the fact. Maybe it's time to stop. Imagine if every one of us stopped all litigation. And everyone could fit the hat as they see fit. I'm not discussing any individual here. The Tzemach Tzedek once said to somebody who came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Rebbe, why did you insult me in public? He said, what do you mean I insulted you? He said, you spoke about my situation, my embarrassing situation. Tzemach Tzedek said to him, I never mentioned a name. He said, everyone knows that what you said fits me. He said, the Tzemach Tzedek answered, I'm like a kaplashmacher. I'm a hat maker. I make hats of different sizes, of different shapes. I put them on the hooks. And then you come in to buy a hat, and if it fits you, that's yours. And he said, and if it fits you, that's the one I meant. You know, there was this person that interpreted on themselves. I'm not the Tzemach Tzedek, but since we could cite the Tzemach Tzedek, not pointing any fingers, only at myself, but each of us have to do the same thing. And maybe if we stopped, imagine we stopped all litigation, all fights, find a mediator, find an objective person, stop thinking you're 100% right. Stop thinking you are representing the Rebbe, and you are the fighter of the holy war. And if everyone listened to you and your approach, for sure everything would be good. Maybe we should just stop. This lesson from this Chassidus Applied is a tremendous lesson. I wish all of us were able to bypass and overcome the nisayon, the test, the temptation of having to fight over things. We'll talk about this some more in a coming question, hopefully in this episode. We need to declare war on this. We have to look at ourselves, and if every one of us did that, I have no doubt there'd be a change of the situation, because that's what we were promised. At the end of the day, it says that a generation that has not rebuilt the Beis HaMikdash is as if they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And we know the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was due to sinas chinam, baseless hatred. So it's very clear, if you believe in what the Gemara says, that baseless love, eliminate baseless hatred, is automatically the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. That, I believe, is what we have to call for to each other and do everything possible to create this revolution. And again, there should only be simchas begoli for everyone, and those that need to be consoled should be consoled. And we have to forge ahead and give each other power and give each other strength to build and build and build until we finish the final building block and have Mashiach b'mheriv yameinu mamish, as the Rebbe promised time and time again about this generation, and said it also at the end of the Sikha about Mrs. Lapine, that the ultimate answer is only Mashiach. We're not looking for any rationalization. That's what we want to have. I don't like to say moving on because it's a topic that deserves more and more, but nevertheless, there are other issues and topics I'd like to address. In context of the general idea of applying Chassidus, something that maybe belongs in a previous episode, but it came my way recently, I felt I should include it into the picture here. I was beginning a certain tradition of reading comments and reading reactions of readers. So here's a letter that came my way. I can't say it's a reaction of a reader, it's actually a letter from the Rebbe. But it's very appropriate because this whole MyLife, Chassidus Applied, began, if you listen to episode 1, which I refer you to, the idea that Chassidus, particularly Tanya, the Torah Shebiksav, the Bible of Chassidus, was meant to be personally relevant to us, Karev Elecha, and Eitzes, advice, personal advice to our issues. Anything we deal with in Avodas Hashem, the Tanya comes to address. And Avodas Hashem is a broad term that addresses almost anything that affects our relationship with God. So there's a letter from the Rebbe that's writing to someone who wonders whether Tanya is relevant. And it's a question that I addressed earlier episodes. So I'd like to read this letter, at least parts of it. The letter is dated, it's again an English letter, 24th of Shvat, 5713. Since some of you asked, these letters that I'm reading in English have not been published in most cases because what we have in the Igros Keders, the series, are mostly in Hebrew and Yiddish. The English letters deserve their own volumes, and hopefully soon they will be published. You're talking about thousands, I hear 10 to 20,000 letters in English, which itself could be major revelations about all kinds of topics the Rebbe addressed. But we do have many of these letters, or some of them, and some that come my way that are relevant to these topics, I obviously cite. So this letter is dated 24th of Shvat, 5713, that's Tovshin Yud Gimel. The Rebbe writes like this: I received your letter of 6th of Shvat, in which you describe your studies at the yeshiva, and express your bewilderment at not finding anything to take out from the shir of Tanya, although you have already reached chapter 18. Okay? The Rebbe continues, I am greatly surprised that you cannot follow the shir, although, as you state, the rabbi explains it well. No doubt this is the result of the interference of the Yetzer. And he continues, you also write that something tells you that the Tanya is only for tzaddikim. This is wrong, of course, for apart from the fact that the very name itself, Sefer Shel Beinanim, already defines itself, it is also explained in the Hagdama, which is the introduction of Tanya, and in chapter 17, as well as other places that it is intended for all, underlined all. The best proof is in the fact that all those who study the Tanya, and parentheses the Rebbe writes, not allowing the Yetzer Hara to hinder them, have benefited so much as to be completely transformed. Completely transformed, I repeat. As to your complaint that you have found nothing to take out from the Tanya, I will point out some lines which are obviously full of meaning. For example, in chapter 6, page 20, in the 10 lines from the 7th to the 17th, you will find enough material to occupy your mind and for hours and days. Likewise, the first 4 lines of page 19, or on page 14 from the end of the 5th line to the 10th. In the same way, you can find some lines on each page which will inspire you to Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, love of God and awe of God, respect of God. And the more you will think about these meaningful teachings, the higher you will rise spiritually. In the course of a letter, it is impossible to say more about this, but the Rashi HaYeshiva and senior Talmidim will surely help you if you will ask them. The important thing is not to be discouraged, for to learn Tanya is like learning any other profound subject. In the same way as when you begin Gemara or even Chumash, you cannot expect to delve very deeply in it as you will years later. So with the Tanya, you will gain depths as the time goes on, and your mind will grasp more and more of Chassidus. I am pleased to hear that you are madrich, helping younger children to understand more of Yiddishkeit. Helping others understand is a segula for God's help to give you too a deeper understanding. With the blessing of Talmud Torah b'Yiras Shamayim, and the Rebbe continues the signature. speaks for itself. Now, I actually went and looked up those lines in Tanya, but I will do that in a future episode. The Rebbe, why he chose these three examples, but you can look them up yourself, as I just cited exactly the chapter and verse and the lines. But clear demonstration that you can be transformed, and every line in Tanya has all kinds of deep meaning, and it requires applying yourself, and above all, believing and accepting that the Alter Rebbe wrote it for you, and for us to address those particular issues. To go back to the questions, many more questions have come in, and I continue to try to address a diverse variety. So let us go to another question, which is, are women second-class citizens in Judaism? So let us read a few questions that came in. Here it goes. The Rebbe explains that in the days of Mordechai and Esther, they fulfilled and accepted what they already accepted. This was the culmination of Matan Torah. This is obviously connected to Purim that was just we're coming from, and obviously between Purim and Pesach, leading also to Pesach. So the question is asked, why then is the simcha without limits until he gets drunk and falls into a drunken sleep? It sounds like this is zero relevance to women, the mitzvah of Adla Yada. Just like the Chassidic explanations about the significance of the dancing on Simchas Torah has seemingly no relevance to women, nor the dancing in the streets on Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. I've learned that since the souls of men and women are two halves that come together in marriage, when a man does tefillin, he's doing so on behalf of both of them. Okay, but then women don't spend much time learning about the significance of tefillin, and we don't put on tefillin, but we do observe the Yomim Tovim and learn a lot about them. So when the emphasis is on what Yom Tov means to the man, well, where does leave the woman? So in other words, when it comes to tefillin or certain particular mitzvahs, especially Shazman, Grama, they're connected to time, fine. There's a partnership and each one does. But when it comes to holidays, why by Purim or Simchas Beis Sheva, Simchas Torah, don't you see the role of a woman being played there? For that matter, how are we supposed to regard the descriptions of Chassidic life of yesteryear in which men left their wives and children and went to the Rebbe for Yom Tov? They didn't go for a day or two. They went for weeks and months at a time. Was Chassidus and the Derech HaChassidus up until the Rebbe Rayat's not meant for women? And the questioner, correctly or incorrectly, and I'll soon correct what I find to be quite distorted here, is why didn't whatever the Rebbe said about the importance of women learning Chassidus apply to the women of previous generations? That's one question. Another question is, it seems obvious that the Alter Rebbe did not have women in mind as part of his designated audience in Tanya. And the person quotes from chapter 14, where the Alter Rebbe describes a woman in a negative way. To try to prove the point that it may not be relevant to women. More and more such questions came in. I can't read them all because of limited of time, but I will just read one more thing. If girls are not taught how to daven like a chassid, why go through the chapters in Tanya about it? Why read the parts that are specifically directed to men? Just so we can be yetze doing chitas? In other words, when learning chitas for a woman, if some parts are not relevant, then why are they studying it? Let's see. Okay, enough said. I'm sure the question can be phrased in many different directions, and let's address it straight head on, and so on. So, though some of the statements made here are technically accurate, however, the context is not. And let me address it from the root of the issue. That there is discrimination against women in society is a given, in both in secular society and religious society. That has anything to do with the Torah is not a given. And we have to distinguish between these two in very clear ways. Just because people do things, that doesn't mean it's Torah. It doesn't mean it's advocated by the Torah. It doesn't mean it's condoned by the Torah. It doesn't mean it can even be absolutely contradictory to Torah. So the first thing, especially when it comes to controversial matters, things or issues like discrimination or second class, first class, and all this type of questions, if you really want an answer, you have to look straight into the Torah. And look how the Rabbeim interpreted that part of the Torah. So let's start from the beginning. What does it say in the beginning of Chumash? It says God created the human being in the divine image. Zachar nekeva bara esam. That's the first time male and female are mentioned in equal terms. Rashi says, and many commentaries say, it was an androgynous creature. Half man, half woman. No second class at all. Later it describes the process of how God separated. So there are opinions whether vayikach mitzela, whether tzela means a side or tzela means a rib, etc., etc. But especially according to Kabbalah, tzela means a side. That's the concept of soulmate. That you're talking about two halves of one whole that reflect the two dimensions in the divine, the masculine dimension and the feminine dimension, called kutchebrichu v'shchinte. Yichud kutchebrinta v'shchinte. Kadosh Baruch Hu v'shchina. Kadosh Baruch Hu refers to, in language of Chassidus, Zayir Ampin, the Midas, Chesed through Yesod, and Malchus refers to the Shechina. And all of mitzvahs and all of Torah is the unification of kutchebrichu v'shchina, which is like the unification of male and female. The book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, is an example, is a metaphor for this union. Chassidus elaborates how these masculine and feminine energies are rooted all the way to the root itself, which is Atzmus Ein Sof. We know God, Hashem Echad, God is one, not male, not female. Male and female are two creatures. Masculine and feminine energy are two forms of energy. They're already manifest energy, two forms of divine expression. In the root of it all, it's all one. B'Tselem Elokim, when we're created in the image of God, the human being, it's created in the full image. However, the divine energy divides into two forms, masculine energy and feminine energy. Masculine energy, you can say, is a more of expressive energy. Ish darkei lichpesh. Man is more the go-getter, so to speak. This doesn't mean man, it means a feminine archetype and a masculine archetype. Every masculine archetype has elements of the feminine, and every feminine archetype has elements of the masculine. Because at the end of the day, they both come from one God, so it's obviously that there's overlap. And yet, when they manifest in a physical way, you have a man and a woman. Going back to the root, so there's one expressive divine energy and one we'll call intimate divine energy. Kvud bas melech pnima. The dignity, the honor of the king's daughter, the princess, is within. So we all have extroverted energy, introverted energy, expressive energy, and internal energy. These are the two archetypes, two divine. In language of Chassidus, it would be Eir legalis la'atzmei, the Eir that is the energy that is revealed for himself. That's the feminine. And then there's the Eir legalis l'zolase, the energy that's to reveal to another. How does that manifest after many, many layers of evolution and of the cosmic order of Ishtalshlus? Like the Talmud says in Yevamos, a man goes out to the field and he threshes, he harvests the wheat and brings it home, and the woman turns it into a beautiful challah, bread. A man goes out and brings pishtan, he brings flax or wool or whatever it may be, and a woman makes a garment out of it. It's a beautiful sikha from the Rebbe, the last Chav Beis Shvat. Tovshin Nun Beis came out as a kuntrus b'cho yevarech Yisrael that the Rebbe passed out, handed out. It has like a pinkish type of cover, lavender. And there's a beautiful sikha where the Rebbe speaks that Dir B'Tachtenim has two elements to it. One is that you build a home for God. The bare elements. What's a home? You have a roof over your head, shelter, protection from the elements. But then there's another part to Adira Noah, a beautiful home, a warm home. You can have a roof over your head and the bare bones of a building, of a home. It may not be a comfortable home. You have protection. But then there's another, is beautifying it. And he said, Chaya Mushke, the name itself, reflects the two elements of beautifying a home. One, Chaya, bringing life into it, an element of vitality. And Mushke, from the word muscat, is one of the spices. And some say one of the Yud Aleph, one of the 11 spices of the Keteiros that were brought in the temple. Muscat, that is a beautiful smell, a reach tev, which reflects a ruach, a spirit, a vibe, so to speak. So these are two partners, and both are necessary to transform this universe. Both are equal elements. And in some ways, the second element is even deeper than the first. So the bottom line is, if you go according to Torah, forget about the way people behave. The way human beings behave has nothing to do necessarily with Torah. It's what they're doing. If you go with that type of bitla and you seek a couple that live in a chassidish way, you'll not find a woman complaining and saying why she's not dancing Simchas Beis Sheva. Why? Because she knows the role that she has is equally, if not more important, than the role the man has. Who says that has to manifest exactly the same way? Who says a woman has to live by the rules of the man? So in society, it is a big injustice. We do have an element of an inequality, male dominance, of hierarchies and so on. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean this is a Torah approach. The fact that it's seeped into Torah life and Jewish life is a sad fact, and we have to remedy it. Who of all people established and demanded that women of our generation should not just be housewives and mothers, but they should also be activists? The Rebbe. In the early 50s, long before the feminist movement, preempting it all, understood that the power of a woman is to be a leader in a community in her own right, in her own way, with her own particular qualities. This is not a matter of competition. We live in a world, as I said, when you have the bittul, where both a man and a woman know that they're two partners that are dedicated to serve a higher cause, you have far less of these issues. When a man behaves as an arrogant person and thinks he's better, and I'm the king and you have to serve me, obviously women are entitled to demand and say, who says? As the Rebbe quotes and says, Ishik Sheira Eser Etzein Baila, the kosher woman is the one, the proper woman is the one that Eser Etzein Baila can mean the literal interpretation to fulfill her husband's will, but Eser also means to create her husband's will. So if her husband's will is one dedicated to God, as Mordechai was, so then Esther is told, listen to Mordechai. But if her husband's will is doing what he wants, then a woman's role is to create the will, is to understand how to initiate and create the will in a subtle way, in a respectful way. Like they say, the man may wear the pants in the family, but it's the woman that tells him what pants to wear. Now, this is my own thing. This is not from any letters of the Rebbe, but it's an idea that a Chassidus, a bittul dikkel woman, will know how to do this in an effective way, and that's why Chochmas Nashim Bonsa Beisei, the wisdom of women build homes. There's a certain wisdom God gave a woman. Bina Yaseda Nitna Beisha. Yesem Beish, she has the element of Bina. But the bottom line is, both partners are meant to be servants of God, not one more than the other. It's not the woman is the servant of God and the man is the servant of himself. That obviously will lead to all the consequences of the inequalities that we see. So my answer to the question in sum is, we have to distinguish between what people do and what the Torah says. It's not just in the Rebbe's generation or the Frierdiker Rebbe's generation, it's in all generations. The Baal Shem Tov, there's a famous story in the year Tafresh Nun Gimel. The Rebbe Rashab tells the story, we didn't know the story until Tafresh Tzadik Zayin, 25 years later. 25 years later, from Tafresh, what would be, the Tzadik Zayin, Tafresh Nun Beis, I should correct myself, 52. In Tafresh Tzadik Zayin, the Frierdiker Rebbe told the story that on Chayel, Shabbos Chayel, the Rebbe Rashab went up Lamaila, the Shama Beguf, and he went into the Heichel of the Baal Shem Tov, and he experienced, and he listened to the Zion Torah, 7 Torahs that the Baal Shem Tov said. And it says in that Torah, a few of them were said in front of men and women. And the Rebbe speaks about it in the year Tafshin Mem Zayin, which was 50 years from Tafresh Tzadik Zayin. The Rebbe speaks about it and emphasizes that, you see, women were there when the Baal Shem Tov was teaching Chassidus. Not by all the Torahs. You know the story with Freda, the daughter of the Alter Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe would send her with questions to the Alter Rebbe and Chassidus, because he thought that the Alter Rebbe would have a soft spot, so to speak, for her and answer those questions. So the idea that women played a role, and maybe sometimes a prominent role, is not just a new phenomenon of our time. It's always been that way. However, their role was Kvuda Bas Melech Pnima. Yes, more discreet. You hear less about it, because we live in a world where fireworks and glamour and everything has to be so obvious. That's not necessarily where the truth lies. Life is built, not what's obvious to the eye. The Rebbe once told a woman in Yechidus, he would always encourage shluchis to be partners with equal partners with their husbands. And once he was asking a woman how she helping her husband and being a partner, not just helping him, but doing everything in her own right. So she said, listen, I help as much as I can, but I want to just say to the Rebbe that fact is, when we have a big Shabbos table or a Passover Seder or so on, people that come, my husband, Fir Tish, he runs the show, and the compliments go to him. Not that I need compliments, she said, but nevertheless, I feel sometimes underappreciated and not appreciated for the role that I play. The Rebbe responded to her and said, you're absolutely right, people should acknowledge, but you have to know we live in a superficial world where people value the things they see and not the things they don't see, even though they're far more precious. And for example, the Rebbe said, when you come into a home, usually you compliment the chandelier, you compliment the furniture, you compliment the paintings on the wall, you compliment the room itself, compliment the cutlery. You never hear someone say, the Rebbe said, that look what a powerful and unwavering foundation this building has. Foundation is buried under the ground. Most people have never seen a foundation. And though that a building cannot stand without a foundation, nevertheless, no one acknowledges it. The Rebbe said, a woman is akeres habayis. She's the foundation of the home. So again, though they should be thanking you, but don't ever think that it weakens in any way your role. Foundation is what holds the whole thing up. The rest of it is peripherals. Some of it is important. Some of it is vital. But the foundation that holds it all up, that's the woman of the house. That's where life is shaped, in the home. Who shaped the future? The children. Now, and sometimes people say, yeah, okay, you'll tell me now, the woman's biggest job is to take care of the children. First of all, what's wrong with that? Children are the most precious commodity we have. It's the future of existence. When God gave the Torah, who did he want as guarantors? The children. We said Pesach. Who is it? The children. This is not meant to patronize. It's not meant to find some obscure Maimer Chazal. This is the foundation of Judaism. Why? Because the women that dedicated and committed their lives to have children. When Pharaoh decreed that every Jewish boy should be killed because his stargazers told him that Moses, the Savior, would be a boy, what happened? And he thought, okay, I'll get rid of all the boys. That way Moses will never grow up to be Moses. What happened? The men said, let's not have children until this horrible decree is over. He's going to kill all our boys. The woman said, if we don't have children, how will we get out of this God-forsaken place? And what did they do? The Talmud in Seita says, they went out into the fields. They found eitzes. Many boys were killed tragically. They went out to the fields when they were ready to give birth, and they gave birth. And what did Yechevah do, the mother of Moses? Ingeniously, she built a basket for him and put him at the edge of the river Nile. And he survived. And because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu was born to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. Because Pharaoh made the mistake of all anti-Semites, which you could say, thank God. They thought the power of Jews lies in the power of manpower. Manpower, male, masculine power. They're stronger, the stronger gender. Firepower. Children and women can be subdued. They didn't realize the power of Judaism lies not in firepower, not in manpower. It lies in faith, in something that's invisible. Pharaoh judged power by his own terms, masculine power. And he underestimated, thank God, and didn't realize that the real power lies in their faith, Amunah, which is Lashon Nekeva. V'hi sha'am delanu, we'll say Pesach. V'hi Lashon Nekeva, the feminine, the promise, the Haftacha, the Amunah, the faith. That's what withstands all our challenges. And that's why you'll find in every prominent holiday, every holiday for that matter, Chanukah, Purim, Pesach, Noshim, women play a prominent role. And the same is today. The Rebbe cites often the Arizal, that our generation is a Gilgal, a reincarnation of the generation of Mitzrayim. Just like B'schus, the merit of the women, then we were redeemed from Egypt. So too today. If this is called second-class citizen, I don't know what is first class. So it's two roles. Two bittul people will not have an issue with this. And yes, Simchas Torah, Simchas Be'Sheva, Purim, maybe there's a different way to celebrate. Adal Yada, to drink and be intoxicated and reach such levels, maybe a man needs that, and that's his role. Not getting now into the actual explanation of that mitzvah. And a woman can reach Adal Yada maybe without a drink, because she herself is intimate, Kvuda Bas Melech Prima, intimate energy, and is already there. Some people need transportation to get there, and some people are already there. And so on. And this again is not meant to find some cute answer. This is consistent throughout Judaism. Unfortunately, it's been distorted by the secular world and also by the Jewish world that have allowed male hierarchies to become dominant. The synagogue was never the center of the Jewish life. It was always the home. You build a mikveh first in a city, not a synagogue, in order of priority. And I can go on and on. I want to just read one letter from the Rebbe, a short letter which is connected to Purim. which we're coming from, where he says, indeed, there is good reason for Jewish women to be in a happy frame of mind in this joyous season in view of the special role of a Jewish woman in bringing about the miracle of Purim. He's talking about the joy. This is a letter written to the participants of the week of the Jewish woman, first week of Adar, Tafshin Mem Zayin, 5747. That was when the week was, but the letter was written Rosh Chodesh Shvat that year. Just one line. And we know how much the Rebbe did to lift up the spirits of women and understand them as leaders, as equal partners, and so on. I refer you also to the Sikha of Shabbos Pasha Emer, Tafshin Nun. It's printed in the Sikhas, the Rebbe Sefer HaSikhas Tafshin Nun, volume 2, page 453, where the Rebbe makes it very clear that learning Chassidus and Tanya is for everybody, men and women alike. Because it's dealing with the foundations of Judaism. The Rebbe calls it the Shish Arei Miklat, the six cities of refuge that the Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch, establishes are eternal mitzvahs: loving God, awe of God, love of others, and so on. Knowing God. In this, women are equal to men. They're obligated to exactly like men are. And in some ways, women can appreciate Chassidus even more than men can, because of the subtleties of it and the intimate nature of Chassidus. So there's many elements to Chassidus. And the Rebbe makes it very clear that it's for everyone. It was always given for everyone. And I want to add something of my own on this. The Rebbe spoke 3 times a year to the women, before Rosh Hashanah, after Shavuos, or before Shavuos, time of the Neshei B'nai's convention, and then right before the summer to the graduates and the girls going out to the camps. Even though they were spoken in a certain manner, just like the Rebbe had different audiences, he spoke to that audience, some of the deepest concepts of Chassidus are said in those talks. When I wrote Torah Meaningful Life, and many of my own teachings in writings that I do, not in classes or in writing and so on, I take straight from those talks. Because the Rebbe speaks it's couched in simple English, in simple Yiddish rather, but the ideas are some of the most profound concepts in the Haskalah of Chassidus. To use one example, often the Rebbe would begin a talk to the women by saying, the Torah is Torah Eir. The Torah is the Torah of light. And the Rebbe would go on. It's a light that both illuminates, guides, and shows us the way in every particular area of life. Open up a Maimer Chassidus and talk about Eir Ein Sof. What's Eir Ein Sof? Eir Ein Sof does exactly that. It reveals, it guides, and actually creates a path. And Chassidus talks about what Eir Ein Sof's role is. So from those talks, you can take out all kinds of deeper dimensions in understanding the word Eir Ein Sof. But the Rebbe didn't start with Eir Ein Sof, this Gala from Atzmos. He speaks about Eir, he speaks about Torah Eir. So it may have been, as I said, presented in deceptively simple language, but some of the deepest elements of Chassidus can be found in those talks. And more examples would require more time, which we will do, I'm sure, in the future. So to say that Tanya Chassidus is only for men is ridiculous. It's not true. Absolutely not true. All the ideas there about impulse control, about mind over matter, about mind, heart, and things we've talked about and things we will talk about are relevant to men and women who have the same struggles and just in different ways. The fact that there are parts in Tanya that talk about, let's say, mitzvah film, the mitzvah of film, listen, there are also parts in Tanya that talk about the mitzvah of a melech, a king, or a kohen. So that means we don't learn it. If Yisrael learns the laws of Kohuna, and the kohen fulfills it. The spiritual concept, however, are relevant to all of us. The fact that in that chapter that was quoted by this questioner, there's a chapter where, chapter 14, he describes a woman in a negative way, no one should take from that. First of all, it's a Gemara. The Alter Rebbe is giving an eitzah for a person who has machshava zaras, negative thoughts about women, how to sometimes eliminate those thoughts. It's not for him to understand women that way. That would be ridiculous. Every man marries a woman. The Alter Rebbe had a wife. They definitely did not look at her that way. If you have a machshava zara, a way to counter machshava zara, the Alter Rebbe gives one of the eitzahs based on the Gemara. But this is not a description or a way of identifying or some type of statement on the reflection of women. Zocher nekeva bara esim, it's a divine, kudsha bricha and shchina. Nekeva to save of gover, the days before Mashiach, will have the woman actually, the feminine energy will rise higher than the masculine energy. More can be said on this, but I'll suffice with that. Next question. Co-dependency. Dear Rabbi, as a parent and a wife married to an addict husband, I would like to know, when do I know if I'm enabling or just being kind? Another question in a similar vein. How does one know when another's involvement in something has reached addictive proportions? My spouse, a very bright person with tremendous productivity, seems to spend all or an exceedingly disproportionate amount of his or free time engaged in electronic games. Is this normal? She becomes so testy when I bring it up that I've stopped doing so to keep peace in the home. I'm not sure if a man of your caliber could relate to electronic games. I assure you that I can, to this questioner. But if you could please address this issue, I would be very grateful. Thank you for your gift of Chassidus Applied. It's a breath of fresh air. Okay. So this is a complicated topic, but let's discuss it. Hillel says, Im ein anili mili, im anila atzmi ma'ani, which seems to be a contradiction, but it's not. There are two parts to any type of relationship. First of all, a relationship with yourself, as well as a relationship with others. Im ein anili mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? God gave us power. Chayecha koidmin. You have to take care of your life. Individuality. Then comes im anila atzmi. If I am for myself, what am I? If you're so self-contained, self-absorbed, and there's no symbiosis, there's no relationship, interaction, and so-called cross-pollination with others, it's also not complete. And this is the balance. We talked about this in previous episodes, the early episodes, individuality and the group and the community and so on. But let's apply this now to marriage and relationships. In relationships, I mentioned earlier, you two have two halves of one. It's true, they all began as one, but then God did separate them. And a woman and man, a husband and wife, are two separate entities. So it's critical, and one of the good reasons for this, that if one of them is lacking, the other one is an independent entity that can pick up the slack or the void and complement the other. Both goes both ways. Man for a woman for a man. Had they been completely one, if one is weak, the other will be weak. So the idea that one spouse becomes a codependent and becomes an enabler can be a detriment, not just to them, but also to the person they're trying to enable. Think of it, the drowning syndrome. A person is drowning in the water, God forbid. So we all know a lifeguard comes to save that person. The person is so desperate and they're thrashing about, they'll usually pull down the lifeguard with them. That's why you have to be trained to not to come from behind, to hold them a certain way, because they become their own worst enemy. They're coming and pulling down the person that's saving them. The similar is in marriage. Because of our love for each other, as spouses, and kindness, you sometimes may be thinking, let me be kind and compassionate. You may end up going down as the lifeguard with the person who's pulling you down. So how does one determine when you're just being kind and when you're being enabling? You need an objective opinion. You obviously have to ask yourself the question, am I being kind or am I being enabling? So that's already a good sign. If you ask the question, at least there's the options. Many people who are enablers don't even ask the question. They think what they're doing is 100% right. Well, if there's a problem in a marriage and you see your spouse is having an issue, you have to always, compassion is fine. But the question is what to do. Should you just go along and enable? You may be causing that person more damage, not just to yourself. That you will be schlepped down with that person. So this, you have to question yourself and then go to an objective party that you can trust and say, here's the scenario, be honest and open, and say, is this, and what am I doing? Am I helping or am I undermining? Sometimes things that we think are compassionate can end up being the crime of compassion. You're doing the exact opposite. So the boundaries have to be kept just as the unity has to be kept. This is called chesed and gvura. Chesed is kindness, but sometimes you need gvura. Gvura doesn't mean necessarily being severe to the other person, but a boundary. Your problem is not my problem. And I'm actually doing you a favor because I'm bringing in fresh air to show you there's another way to look at it. So the first step is not allow yourself to be schlepped down by the other party's issues. This happens again and again, especially narcissists, especially people who are trying to preserve themselves. But the first thing they do is they pull their spouse and family into it. So now you don't have only one person who's the criminal. Now you have others that are now supporting it, all in the name of love, all in the name of kindness. And truth is, everyone's undermining. That person is, even not knowingly, is that drowning person is helping others drown with them. So this is a critical component that we have to look at. When you see a problem, do not think that just being kind is the solution. On the other hand, to just be severe and without any cheshbon at all is also not necessarily the right way to go. This needs to be assessed case by case. Now, how do you know when something has reached addictive proportions? Well, electronic games is one thing. Pornography is another, as we've discussed. Other addictions like drugs and alcohol and other worse things are obviously equally problematic. So games, I'm not going to suggest addictive is addictive. And someone that just plays games all the time, they probably could be doing better things. I don't know if everything has to become a red flag and you have to, a whistle blowing, because sometimes you have to pick your battles. Everyone has their mishigas and everyone has their little quirks. You have to know if it's destructive or not. Now, if the person wants to be playing games, a lot of games, it may be destructive, their time, their waste of time, and so on. This requires, number one, measuring whether this is an issue to fight over. Some things have to be overlooked. If it's an issue, as I said earlier, that affects the rest of the family, it affects the spouse, and you feel it's being destructive, then obviously it's more than just an obsession with a game. Then it's probably something that needs to be looked at. This again is case by case, and always best to have a selech harav, knelech chaver, a mentor, a friend, and someone that you can speak to and consult, a mashpia, to make sure, because you may be wrong. Either way, you may err on the side of too much caution, or you may err on the side of too much laxity. So that needs to be determined. The bottom line is that God sent us spouses in order to be able to help us. So when there's a problem, the worst thing you want is the person that could help you suddenly schlep them in and make them part of your problem. Now, that a person who's drowning that does that, they're accountable for it. And I hope some of them listening to this will understand that at least if you're doing something wrong, don't realize that the person that is your spouse may be your best savior if you allow them to disagree with you and challenge you. I know that's a bitter pill to swallow, and especially narcissists or others who are self-consumed with their own insecurity and saving their own skin can't really hear this. But maybe, I'm trying to say it from words from the heart, enter the heart. The people you love may be your saviors, and don't make them into you. Because what happens usually when a person does something wrong, one wrong leads to the other wrong. There's a saying they say, a lie, when you lie, it may give you a path going forward, but you may not have a path to go back. And life is about connecting the past and the future. So it's important to know, and I say this to people who are in this situation, respect the people that love you. And if they disagree, and they may be the people that save you, just like you may be drowning, don't schlep them down, don't pull them down with you. So this is a critical component in all relationships. Now, of course, to the people who are more objective, witnessing this, don't allow yourself to be dragged down, because you are not only doing an injustice and disservice to yourself, but also to the person that you want to help. So that's co-dependency, dealing with spouse that is an addict. I'm sure there's more that could be said about this. Let's move on to yet another question. Sibling rivalry. I know it's very normal for children to fight, but two of my daughters seem to take it to the next level. They are competitive and just plain out mean to each other. It was bad when they were younger, but we figured they would grow out of it. To others, they are gentle and sweet, but to each other, they unveil a cruelness that is hurtful and scary, and it seems to only be getting worse. What can I do? Concerned parent. Second questioner. Bli ayin hara, I come from a large family, which for the most part is a gift, but sometimes it's really challenging. I feel that we are often competing for our parents' attention and nachas, to the point that we sometimes trample each other. Sometimes I find myself jealous of a sibling's looks and midas, rather than focusing on my own unique gifts. Any advice? Well, let's begin with a story with the Rebbe. The Rebbe told a girl who was bickering with her parent. The Rebbe said, I have a mother, my mother passed away. The Rebbe speaking about himself and his mother, he says, what I would do to be able to spend more time with my mother. We have to sometimes step back and appreciate what we have. Recently I mentioned a tragedy that close to me, to my heart. A young woman with 16 siblings. Do we need to wait for a loss to appreciate that we love each other? In this case, they happen to love each other unconditionally without the loss. So I don't even know what wake-up call there is there. But you look at sometimes and define things in priorities. I know brothers and sisters don't talk to each other. It usually traced to some type of petty thing, certain jealousies, financial matters, sometimes parents' preferential treatment, which of course is a topic of its own. I say this to any parent, never ever create preferential treatment, especially after you've passed away. You leave some type of this imbalance, because what you leave is the haunting knowledge. It's not just the money, it's not just the possessions, is that my mother loved my brother or sister more than me. So that's something to parents. But now to talk about siblings, it comes down to, from a Chassidic point of view, you have to step back and sometimes say, what am I fighting over? Yes, it's natural to be jealous, especially if one child is especially gifted. It's natural. But at the end of the day, think about priorities. I'm not suggesting think about after May of Esrim Shana, but think about priorities. That's number one. Number two, the concept of bittul. Everything we discussed about anger, about jealousy, about grudges, obviously applies even more so to siblings. To be able to go and transcend your own feelings. We talked about Yosef and his brothers. There was sibling rivalry. And what was the solution? Yosef did not reciprocate. On the contrary, he demonstrated something that nobody could ever have imagined. And we discussed that in a previous session, so I don't want to go over that right now. But siblings, we are family. We are one with each other. At the end of the day, this is your own flesh and blood. So we have to step back, and when there is sibling rivalry, and do something about it. So of course, there's one thing to address the siblings, another is to address parents that see this. Parents have to do everything possible to make sure there's no preferential treatment. Now, if a sibling did a true injustice to another, parents are responsible to find that out and find a professional way to address it. To just say, I want to treat everyone equal, when one was actually hurt by another, is also equally a problem, like we spoke before about the codependence. At the same time, parents to just have preferential treatment for no particular reason is an issue that parents must look at. And often sibling rivalry in a subtle way is rooted in the parents' attitudes. And as far as siblings go, it depends what age you are. Obviously, if you come of age and you can look at it, why not sit down and resolve it once and for all? Get over the issues. Sometimes you may need help from a third party. Sometimes you may even need to write a letter to describe what your feelings are. But at the end of the day, obviously human beings are human beings. And we could all point fingers and say, this sibling has been dominant, this one has belittled me, this one tries to be a big guy on my cheshbon. Many siblings talk about that, about their older siblings who, in a sense, intimidate them intentionally, unintentionally. Everything can be addressed if you're ready to address it. This is a Chassidic approach. Is there a quick solution? If there was a quick solution, we wouldn't have this issue. What I would encourage is utilizing elements of what we discussed with Yosef and his brothers, the ability to not allow yourself to become petty and to become a greater person, to not allow material things to become a wedge between siblings, and above all, to develop an element of bittul, And this requires sitting down. It often requires bringing in a third party and to do whatever is necessary. I will talk about this some more because time is limited. I'd have to cut this short. But I want to just conclude by saying that in context of all the events that have been happening, this is an opportunity for us to look at ourselves with introspection, to look at our own infighting, including sibling rivalry. We will talk more about community conflicts and other conflicts, God forbid, in future episodes, and to do something about all of this by looking back and saying, let's step back in the scheme of things. In the scheme of things, what is a priority, what is secondary? This is a critical way of looking at life. And when you do that, you often can resolve many, many issues. And ultimately realize we have one life to live. Time is limited. God will bless us all with many healthy years. Mashiach will come. But we have to still use our time to the fullest. And is it worth the time to be occupied with thinking negative thoughts about others and allowing them to think negative thoughts about you? Crimes are crimes. If you bring it to the light, you can identify what is a problem, what is not. But just to say, and I want to say this to people who've perpetrated crimes, don't think that I'm trying to suggest that your crimes will be overlooked. A crime is a crime. You have to be called on it. To cover it up is not the solution to shalom, to peace, to tranquility. It's to address it full force, head on, so you can be able to get rid of an infection. Infections are not fought by ignoring them. Infections are fought by identifying them, shining the light, and then challenging them. At the same time, those of us that have been affected by others, we have to be able to find our own inner strength and not allow ourselves to succumb to pettiness and to reciprocate and try to isolate the problem instead of exacerbating it. God should bless us all only having peace and love in our families, in our homes, in our communities, and ultimately that Avos Yisrael and Avos Chinam would create the unity of bringing Hashem Echad Barchenu Avinu Kolanu Ka'echad. The blessings of God dwell on a people that are stand together and unified as one, a people, a community, a family. Thank you very much. You've been listening to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 11. Next, episode 12 will be coming Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.